Hey, what's up, everybody? As many of you know, I'm a strong Ukrainian supporter, and one of my pet peeves is Russian disinformation, especially when it's echoed by Americans. A Facebook friend, Rita, who claims to be a journalist, recently shared an article that appeared on my feed.
Democrats and Republicans down the rabbit hole. You don't have to love Russia to dislike Ukraine, and you don't have to love Trump to agree with his idea of peace.
Now, the title grabbed my attention, so I checked it out. But as I scrolled, I was horrified by the escalating nonsensical disinformation. Now, fact-checking the whole piece would take hours, so here are just a few excerpts to illustrate.
I'm going to share my findings from both sides of the aisle relating to love and war. One thing is for sure, the worldwide military-industrial complex war agenda is still alive and well after last week's meeting. Remember, war makes warmongers lots of money.
Rita claims that Ukraine's defense against Russia's full-scale invasion since February of 2022 is not about self-preservation. It's a ploy by the U.S. military-industrial complex. According to Rita's logic, Ukrainians fight back not to protect themselves from the horrors of the Russian military, but to enrich American defense contractors. This argument completely ignores Russia's atrocities, from civilian massacres to the horrors of Bucha. The idea that Ukraine resisted to benefit the deep state is absurd. Furthermore, I've been to Ukraine and I've seen evidence of Russia's war crimes. Now, if you're wondering whether Rita has some special expertise, let's examine her credibility.
Next, and if you need to ask if I have been to Ukraine on a war correspondence mission, I have not. Research from Ukraine's people and others speaking loudly, it is out there if you want to know the truth. In my research, I found the only person who mentioned peace was Trump.
That's right. She's never even been to Ukraine during the war, yet somehow felt empowered to write an article about the war in Ukraine. She claims Trump is the only one talking about peace. This is absurd. Zelensky speaks of peace daily, and he put forth his own peace plan. I've been to Ukraine 6 times, 3 since the full invasion. I can assure you that no one wants peace more than Ukrainians and their leaders. But unfortunately, Russia has a well-documented history of breaking agreements, from the Budapest Memorandum to the Musk ceasefire to dozens more. This is why Ukraine must have security guarantees from the West.
I heard a report that Zelensky was supposed to accept the deal, and that was the plan before the cameras came on that day. From the look on the face of Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., I think Mr. Z forgot to read the script.
So besides being a journalist, Rita is now, I guess, a mind reader, and she knows what the Ukrainian ambassador was thinking. Rita, can you please tell me now what I'm thinking? You guessed it. I'm thinking you're not a credible journalist and you have no idea what you're talking about.
Some have said Vance was rude to Zelensky, and that was what began the falling out. But most are aware the bottom line is Zelensky does not want peace. Peace does not come with money.
Rita again insists, without proof, that Zelensky somehow doesn't want peace and is also somehow making money off this war. She ignores the basic fact that Russia is the one who invaded. Russia is occupying Ukraine and bombs Ukraine daily. Missiles, drones, mortars, almost all targeted at civilians. Can you imagine trying to raise a child in this? Peace is simple. Russia stops bombing and leaves. So why is Trump pressuring the victims, Ukraine, for concessions, cutting aid, endangering civilians, while rewarding the aggressor, Putin, by lifting sanctions? Make no mistake, if Ukraine stops fighting, they lose their country. If Russia stops attacking, the war ends. You don't need to be a geopolitical expert to grasp this, but somehow Rita still doesn't.
Does anyone remember when this Ukraine mess started? Let's begin in 2014, after much hustle from previous years. Do your research. The U.S. participated in a coup that overthrew the Ukrainian government, installed a new one, and entered the Minsk agreement backed by the UN. Ukraine decided they didn't like that agreement, and here we are with Russia having a problem with NATO encroaching and the U.S. having played heavy drama queen in the ordeal.
Rita's ignorance reaches new heights here. The mess she refers to is the 2013-14 Maidan Revolution, I think, or the Revolution of Dignity, as it's sometimes called. Now, the hustle before that, I think, refers to Russia's interference in past elections in Ukraine, including the 2004 Orange Revolution, during which Russia poisoned a presidential candidate. Rita obviously does not understand the situation or the history there, but she fully embraces anti-U.S. propaganda, claiming the U.S. and EU orchestrated the Maidan. I went to Ukraine for the first time in 2012. Many were already frustrated with that president then, Yanukovych. He's a corrupt Russian puppet who was living lavishly while Ukrainians struggled. The revolution erupted when Yanukovych reneged on an EU trade deal under Putin pressure. Protests grew, Yanukovych overreacted, he cracked down, and that just fueled national outrage. So, the revolution grew. And then his forces again overreacted, killed over 108 protesters, and kidnapped and tortured others. Eventually, Yanukovych fled to Moscow to be with his puppeteer in the middle of the night. Then Putin, who was angry, decided to take Crimea and Donbass and displace families like my videographer, Anastasia's family. In 2019, when I returned to Ukraine, I met Maidan participants, and they were so proud because they had reclaimed their country and had told Putin to butt out of their affairs. And once again, Russia is the one who broke the Minsk ceasefire agreement. This is common knowledge. How did you get that fact so wrong?
Let's remember, it was about 2022 when the Ukraine good Russia bad narrative was kicked over to mainstream media to spin to the sheep in the audience.
Now this is rich. Rita thinks Russia isn't really that bad, that it's just mainstream media. They're spinning sheep, poor little sheep like me, someone who's actually been to Ukraine during the war, felt the mortars, heard the air raid sirens. Listen, Russia's actions speak for themselves, Rita. They've committed over 100,000 alleged war crimes, 100,000 killing civilians trying to escape the war. I saw that. Mass graves in Bucha, torturing POWs, firing on rescue workers, double-tap missile strikes, targeting apartments, children's hospitals, maternity wards. They've killed over 10,000 civilians, including 1,000 children, and kidnapped 20,000 Ukrainian kids for re-education camps. There are tens of thousands more casualties. How much more proof do you need that Russia is the bad guy here? I saw the aftermath when Russia destroyed the Kakhovka Dam in 2023, flooding thousands of homes and then firing on volunteers when they tried to help. Where were you, Rita? You were at home, swallowing Russian propaganda, safe in the confines of U.S. security. Ask any of the hundreds of thousands of new Russian exiles how great Russia is. My musician Russian friend Dima had to flee to Argentina because he was being threatened for speaking out against the war. While I'm here in Argentina right now. I met another Russian exile that in Buenos Aires, she can't return home to visit her aging parents because she posted some anti-war content on social media. Yeah, Rita, Russia's just wonderful. It's all mainstream spin. Just ask a Russian exile how wonderful Russia is.
Ukraine has never been a poster child for clean living. It was rough long before mainstream made it a popular conflict. Once when I was on the border of Romania, Ukraine, I was told very matter-of-factly by my handler not to take photos toward the Ukrainian border or I might be shot. Ukraine has been called one of the most corrupt countries, and most people have been aware for years.
Rita had a bad experience at the Ukraine border. That's not unusual. War or not, border security, countries all over the world is tight, and photography is usually prohibited. Any traveler knows that. The corruption she's referencing is a Soviet-era remnant. Exactly why Ukrainians seek EU integration, for transparency and reform. Ukrainians hate corruption because it benefits the oligarchs, not the people, just like here. In all my time in Ukraine, I've never been shortchanged by a taxi driver or a retailer. I've visited over 80 countries, and that's not something I can say about most places. Outside of war, Ukraine is peaceful, friendly, and safe, and its people are largely honest. Far more honest than many of my fellow Americans, I'm sad to say, including you, Rita.
Men are now being kidnapped off the street and forced to go to war with no recruitment, and apparently soldiers are saying they do not want to fight anymore.
Rita, this is called a draft. It's pretty standard for a country at war. Ukraine has been very restrained in their conscription, with the current draft age being 25, not 18 like we did in the US during Vietnam. You're right, though. Ukrainian soldiers don't want to fight, but they have to fight. They must fight if they are to survive and not have more atrocities occur for their loved ones. It's not a matter of want, it's a matter of survival. I have friends on the front lines. Some are Ukrainians. Some are 100% American without a drop of Ukrainian ancestry. Neither of them, none of them, will stop until Russia is expelled. No one wants peace more than Ukrainians. They've buried thousands. This misleading article insults their suffering. It's disgusting.
I would like to remind all those yelling democracy in the U.S. that word shows up in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence 0 times. Even so, in our little republic, so many Americans love to hate, while siding with an actor-turned-president and an industrial military complex. Just be glad your voice is heard at all, since some are not so lucky.
Yeah, you know where they're not so lucky with free speech? Russia. Dima, my Russian musician's friend, he has a colleague, an American musician, actually, who was living in Russia, Travis Leak. He's now in a Russian jail. So is a Russian-American, Ksenia Karelina from California. She visited Russia to visit her grandparents and was arrested when the FSB went through her phone and found she made a $51 donation to a Ukrainian NGO. She's still in jail. Both remain in prison, and they may face the same fate as opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who was poisoned and then killed by Putin. I'd tell you to ask the scores of Russians who mysteriously fall out of windows when they speak out against Putin, but they're dead.
From red romper to green pantsuit, I thought Mr. Z might have dressed a little fancier to visit the White House and his European buddies who pledged him money days later.
Rita ignores that Zelensky wears his military outfit in solidarity with Ukrainian soldiers and has said he won't change until the war is ended. It's kind of funny that she had no complaints about Winston Churchill visiting FDR's White House in military attire during World War II when he visited the United States. Or what about Elon's Oval Office t-shirt and baseball cap look? This is exhausting, but I'm almost done. Rita continues.
For those Americans standing with Ukraine, make sure you aren't just standing against Trump. Bonehead move. And in that same stance, remember, you are standing for taxpayers' money used to kill people, not peace, and not to be used in ways Americans can benefit.
More blatant lies. The $118 billion in aid to Ukraine, not $300 billion as Trump keeps falsely claiming for some reason, but most of that $118 billion consisted of old U.S. weapons that would have been very costly to dispose of. It was cheaper to send them to Ukraine and let them use them to defend themselves against Russia. The funds for new weapons were reinvested in the United States, boosting American jobs, or as you like to say, the military-industrial complex. It benefited Americans. Now, the humanitarian aid to Ukraine that is now cut off was scrutinized more than any aid in U.S. history in any country. And yet, for less than 5% of the United States Department of Defense budget, the U.S. has helped Ukraine weaken Russia's military, the world's biggest threat to peace, all without risking a single U.S. soldier. Russia is our enemy, Rita. Ukraine is our ally. Russia destroyed Chechnya and Syria. They invaded Georgia in 2008, and they still occupy 20% of it. Have you been there? I've been to Russian-occupied Georgia, Rita. You should try it sometime. Russia interferes globally, cyber warfare, disinformation, election interference, and they regularly target our infrastructure. Putin loves to threaten nuclear war against the U.S. So why are you spreading Kremlin propaganda and betraying your own country?
Peace is the only answer in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and it will be negotiated by Trump somehow.
Rita claims Trump, a man who somehow bankrupted casinos and relied on Russian banks to bail him out, is playing chess and we're all playing checkers. Nonsense. He's handing a failed terrorist state headed by a war criminal who knowingly targets and kills children and is wanted by The Hague everything he wants. Russia was on its back foot. 2025 was a year the economy would probably collapse, and now Trump has given them a lifeline. He's cutting aid to our ally, Ukraine, removing legal protections for Ukrainian refugees, and disrespecting its leader, all while lifting sanctions on Russia. I wonder why. I've studied the history of Russia and Ukraine a lot. I know about the Holodomor and Russia's historical subjugation of the Ukrainian people, culture, and language. I've been to Ukraine during wartime, as I've said. I felt the fear firsthand. I've visited the soldiers and civilian amputees. I've met the Gold Star mothers of some of the more than 50 Americans who died fighting for Ukraine. These mothers, even after such a devastating loss of their sons, are still advocating for Ukraine. They don't want their son's sacrifice to be in vain, and they understood what their sons were fighting for, but you don't. Rita's reckless, inaccurate article glibly disrespects them all. It's shameful, it's disgusting, and it's depressing that Americans are participating in this behavior that is increasing human suffering exponentially. It's such a waste. Why are you doing it, Rita? Why?